This is the third in a series of integration videos where we take DBsign and show you the steps needed to integrate into this simple web application that you see here in the browser. Uh, in the first video, we showed you how to use the DBsign JSWS, JavaScript Web Signer, which is a JavaScript library that you use in your web applications to sign data, and you can leverage TLS authentication to sign your data. In the next video, we took that a step further, and instead of the JSWS signing things initiating from the client, we submitted all the information from the application here, and we did everything server side. And instead of a user certificate, we used a username or a user identifier that the application supplied to us for the purposes of generating the digital signature. And in this example, we're going to take both of those just a little bit further, and instead of just signing the data that we submit on the other side, we're actually going to be signing a PDF. And we have a blank PDF back on our server side that looks like this. And so when we submit this information, we're going to be using DBsign to fill out these form fields based on what was submitted, as well as signing this in such a way that the signatures will be viewable and verifiable in Adobe Acrobat Reader. So that's what we're going to be doing first. In the next parts of the video, I'll show you a little bit of the legwork I did on the server side just to get things ready and deploying the application, and then we'll look at DBsign configuration, make sure we've got all the requests permitted that we need to have permitted, and then we'll take a look at the application code and how it works. Just to get an overview of how this test application is deployed here on this server, we're on Windows here, and if you remember in the other videos, we were on Linux. But it's the same HTML and it's the same Node.js backend. We're just running everything off of Windows in this example. So I've got my my backend code, which is in this API folder, and I've got my test code, which is in this test folder, and all of this code is available on our GitHub site, and there'll be links down below the video. And so these are just deployed in IIS. And for this example, I did do a couple of things here in IIS. Mainly, we're going to be using user mode to sign these documents, which means that on the server side, we're going to be supplying the username and the user information. But just to add a little bit more depth to this example, I'm going to be getting that user information from a user's certificate that's going to be provided by the browser. Now, we're not going to be using the JSWS to do this, but what I did is for this API folder, which is the back end of my website, I enabled SSL client-side authentication and set it to required. So anytime we post anything back over to that, it's going to ask us for a certificate, and then IIS is going to provide the certificate back to the back end, and we'll be able to get information out of it. Now, this is not required to sign these PDFs like this. In fact, there's a lot of people that are not signing PDFs this way, and they're just going to be giving a username or a user ID, but we also have a lot of people that are wanting to sign, and they want to sign with their user certificates, but they're not in control of the TLS authentication mechanisms, and they may not have the entire certificate available to them. They may only have the common name from the certificate, or maybe the subject DN, and so we're going to take both of those concepts, and we're going to be using the subject DN and the common name from a user certificate to put information on this PDF signature. And then apart from that, there's not really much else that I needed to do for the application itself. So you can go grab the source if you want to play with it from GitHub. As far as DBsign goes, let's open up our server configuration file and take a look at what requests we need to enable. because if you remember, by default in a DBsign installation, all the requests are disabled. So we've enabled a couple for the previous examples, and so now we need to go do a little bit more work in here and enable some more requests for PDF signing. So again, we're deployed in Tomcat. The exact location of your DBsign server deployment will be different, but in Tomcat, I'm under Web Apps, DBsign, Web-INF, and I'm looking for dbsign.cfg. And all of the requests that we're going to be looking for here are down in the default instance. So let's go to default and let's scroll down to request security. Now I've already been down in here in this file and made some changes. So I've already gone and done some of the legwork, but let's go over what I've done. Here in request security, we had talked about a few of these requests in the past, and the one we're concerned with in this example is PDF sign. And I have set it from disabled to privileged. And it doesn't have to be public because, again, this is going to be a request that's going to be coming from our back end. It's going to be coming from a server running on local host. Now, yours may not be local host, but it's still going to be something on your back end. So I set it to privileged, and my allow privileged IPs are still valid for what I want to do here. So PDF sign, set that to privileged. And then let's scroll down a little more, and we want to enable PDF signing. Now, this is disabled by default, so you're going to want to scroll down and find PDF signing and check the box for enable PDF signing. Now, DBsign can do a lot of other things with PDF that we're not really going to go into detail about here, and we're not going to enable them. For example, we can include trusted timestamps into your PDF, and we can do LTV info. That's long-term validation info, where we embed either the CRLs or an OCSP response in the actual PDF signature, and that way you can be assured that whenever you open up the PDF at any point in the future, that you'll be able to verify that that signature was good when it was signed, because you're not going to have to go out and find old revocation information because it's going to be embedded in there. It's also going to have a timestamp that's going to prove that the document was signed within the validity period of the signer certificate and all of that kind of stuff. But we're not going to be doing that here, so I'm just going to leave that stuff off for the moment. So the only things we really needed to do in here was to enable PDF signing and set PDF sign requests to privileged. Now I'm going to save that, and we can go ahead and close that. And that should be it. I have already restarted Tomcat, but I'm just going to restart it again for good measure. And then in the next video, we will be looking at the actual code that we need to sign these PDF files. In the last two videos, we did a lot of things in JavaScript client side in the browser. For example, when we hit the submit button, we didn't allow the form to follow its default behavior and post and then navigate. We intercepted the submission, and we did some things. In some cases, we called the client side JavaScript libraries to sign the data, and in others we initiated an AJAX request to post the data. But in this example, we're going to simplify the actual HTML code and the client side web code a lot, because what we're going to do is we want this form to do what it normally would do. So we're going to hit submit, and the browser's going to do what it would normally do. We're not hijacking the request and doing any kind of AJAX or anything like that. And so the first thing that I wanted to do is go in here into my index.html, and I needed to make sure that the form had the proper method and its post, and the action where we're going to be posting to is that backend API. Now, if you go back and compare this code to the previous versions from the previous videos, what I have highlighted here was missing. But this is the only thing that I have added in index.html. So we're telling the form what method to use, and we're telling it where to post to. And if you recall, the meat of everything that happened previously was in test.js. But I've taken all of that out. If you go back and compare in document.ready, we got the form and we overrode its default submission behavior so that when we could control what happened when we click submit. We're not doing that here. We just want the browser to do what it normally would, and we're going to post back to the back end. So I took a lot of stuff out of test.js. So the HTML and the JavaScript client-side code has been much simplified and easy, maybe a little bit easier to follow, but it's definitely more simple. But we have gone and done a few things on the back end. So let's go back, and if you remember, our backend code is basically two different parts. There was appy.js, which was the server, and then there's the DBsign module, where we are doing HTTP requests and formatting all of our requests and responses. And in the previous videos, we were using a function called appVerify, and then we were using a function called appSign. And we have a new function in here now for the DBsign module called PDF sign. And it's going to take several different fields here. The first we're going to give to it is the user ID. And this is going to be a required field for what we're doing. This is the user ID that you give to us. This is the user you're telling us is signing the data. Now, friendly user ID, that's not something that you're necessarily going to see somewhere else or you're going to see in documentation, but I'll show you how we're going to use it in a little bit. Basically, there's a couple of different ideas with where this user information is going to be displayed in the PDF. And there's going to be detailed information about the signature in the Adobe Reader's signing pane, and when you go and look at the signature details. And we're going to use user ID there, and user ID is going to be very specific and it's going to be detailed. It's going to have more information in it than maybe we want to see on our form. This friendly name, we're just going to use it so that our signature block doesn't get overpopulated and too messy. For example, my username on this application could be Bob Smith 12345. That could be what I want in the signature so that I can identify this actual user, because there may be a Bob Smith 12345. There may also be a Bob Smith 5678 or a B Smith or whatever it may be. And so you want to be able to distinguish users, or you may want to have a lot of information, but you may not want to necessarily put all that in your signature block. Or for example, if you're just Bob Smith 123, you don't want your signature block to say Bob Smith 123. You want your signature block to say Bob Smith. And so that's what we're going to use the friendly user ID for, and I'll show you how that works. We also are going to pass in the base64 encoded blank PDF. And I showed you earlier, underneath our API folder for the backend, I have a blank form, and that's the one we're going to be using every time we sign. We're just going to take a blank one, fill it out, and sign it. And inside of that PDF, let me open this back up. Inside of the PDF, we're going to have a couple of different fields. We've got this field, and this is a PDF that we've made, so I know what these fields are named. This field is called first name. This field is called last name. And the signature field is called, I believe it's called signature 1. And what we need to supply to DBsign when we're signing and filling out is we need to supply it the names of these fields we want to fill out, as as well as what values we want to go in it. And we need to tell it the name or the ID of the signature field that we're going to be signing. And so that's what we pass in with the signature field name. And then the fields. This fields is just going to be a name value pair list of the fields we want to file with their name and their value. And then reason is just a textual description of why you're signing this PDF. It's just, it goes in the signature of the PDF. For example, I'm signing this to approve some leave, or to just approve whatever data I'm signing. The reason is not, it's not required, but we put it in here and I'm going to show you how to do it just for completeness. And so those are the things that we're going to need to provide when we call PDF sign. And we can look a little bit more in detail in this before we go look at the code that calls it. And if you recall, when we're doing a signature, when we're doing one of these requests from the back end, it's just an HTTP request with a bunch of different post fields that tell us what to do. And so the first thing we want to do is tell it what kind of request we're making here. And so this is a PDF sign request. And our auth type is user ID. Remember, this could be user ID or it could be cert. We're doing user ID here because we're providing the user's name or the user's identifier. And the value for that auth is going to be user ID. Now this, again, this is the user ID that the user used to authenticate into your system with. And then we have PDF signer name. Now, the user ID is what's going to show up when you go in and look at the signature details, and you're going to see that this PDF was signed on behalf of some user, and that's where you're going to see user ID. This DBS PDF signer name is what's going to show up in the signature field that you actually view, you know, the graphical signature field on the PDF. Now, this is not required, and if you don't put it, you're just going to get the user ID stuck in that place. But we'll show you the difference when we actually sign something in a minute. I'll show you the difference in where those two are shown. Then the data to be signed, we're going to give it the base 64 encoded PDF. We'll read this from the file system and base 64 encode it. There are a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can go read more about this in the documentation, but another way, instead of having to pass around this base 64 encoded string, is you can use a feature called DTBS ID, where the data, the PDF itself, is going to reside in a database table, a special database table, and its primary key is going to be some unique identifier. And if you don't want to pass around these big base 64 strings, this one's not that big, so it's really not that big of a deal. But you may have PDFs that are, you know, dozens of megabytes, or maybe even larger than that, and you don't want to necessarily be passing all of that over post fields back and forth to the server. So you can stick that PDF in your database and get a unique identifier for it, and instead of passing the whole base 64 encoded file, you can pass it that identifier and then tell it the format is DTBS ID instead of base 64, and DBsign will go and query that thing up out of the database and sign it and stick it back and stick the signature back in the database, so that you're not passing all these things around over HTTP on the network. But here, the PDF is small. We're just gonna do it as part of the HTTP request. Then we've got the DBS PDF SIG field name that we're passing in here, and this is the name of the field, the signature field that you want to populate inside of the actual PDF document. PDF signer reason, again, this is the reason for signing, just a string. This one's not required, but it can be useful. Show the signer reason. I'm setting this to false, but if you set it to true, the reason, whatever string you pass in, will show up on the on the graphical display where the user's information is displayed in the signature block on the PDF. Show sign date, setting it to true. That shows the signer date up under the PDF signer's name on the document. Lock fields to true. So any fields that I'm going to tell DBsign to fill, we're going to lock those so that after it's signed, they can't be filled again. So they'll be marked read only in the PDF. And then the date that we're going to show, this time zone and this format are not required, but I wanted to show you some different options. And so as far as that time that's displayed to the user, we're going to display it in a specific format. And we want that to be in Eastern time, America/New York time. This format right here, there's a lot of flexibility here. You can make it look pretty much any way you want to make it look. So those are the main fields those are the main post parameters that we're looking at here. But what you'll see missing is these fields that I want to fill, right? So we're going to be passing it first name and last name, and we want those populated. So we need them in here. And the way that you're going to do that is they need to be added as name value pairs into the list here. And then you have to tell it what the names of those fields are. And we'll look at the way that looks when we make a request, and I'll go in and look at the logs and we'll see all of the fields that are filed. But basically it's going to look something like this. But I've done this programmatically so that I didn't have to have advanced knowledge of exactly the way these look. So we're going to have something that looks like first name and, Bob, last name, Smith, and then DBS underscore fill, FIELDS fields. And then this is a comma separated list. And so DBsign, when it goes to fill the fields in the PDF, is in the post data, it will look for F name and L name and get those values out of the post fields, and it will fill the PDF with them. Now, again, I'm doing this programmatically, and that's what this is doing down here. It's just basically looping through the fields that I give it, and it's adding those by name and value into this request data object, and it's building up a comma separated list of the field keys, and then put those in DBS fill fields. Again, we'll after we make an actual request, we'll go back and we'll take a look at that in our server logs. And so that's all we've done here in the DBsign module, is we have added this PDF sign function. So now let's go take a look where we call that. Go watch the other videos to learn about all the stuff that happens here in this file. We're not going to go into it in detail, but here's what we've changed since the last time. In handle post, what we did last time was read in all of the data, and then we did an app sign. But we're not doing app sign this time. This time we are doing what you're calling PDF sign, and we're going to pass it all of that information that we gave it. Now, remember, the first thing we give it is the user ID. Now, in this example, I do have the client's certificate available to me. But don't get hung up on certificates here. You don't have to use them. You can use your own user ID and usernames. But because I have the certificate available to me, I'm going to do a couple of different things. So with PDF sign, if you remember, the first thing we pass it is the user ID. And for the user ID, I'm going to use the subject DN from my certificate. And that's going to have things like my common name, which is basically my name, and then it's going to have a unique identifier and then organizational information. So it's a pretty long string. And I may not want that whole string to sit there on my PDF in the signature block. So I'm going to get just the common name off of my certificate to use for what actually shows up in the signature block. And I'll show you that when we generate our PDF here in a minute. And then we're going to read, this function just reads that blank PDF off of the file system and converts it to base 64. And then this is the name of the signature field in that PDF. Then I have my reason. I'm signing this PDF because I'm approving the first name and the last name. And then remember, the last thing in here was the fields that we want to fill out. And on this PDF document, I have a field called first name and a field called last name. And I want first name to come from fname from my submitted data. Remember, that's from over here on this HTML form. And then lname is going to be what I submitted for last name. So that's going to get the information from my HTML form, and it's going to stick it in that PDF. And then, of course, after I have made the request, if it's successful, if the HTTP request happens successfully, I am going to process the response. And then if not, I'm going to, if something happened in the request, I am going to just send an error message back to the client. And then up here, when we process the response, we're going to get the, out of the response data that comes back, we're going to get the DBS signature value, and that's going to be the actual base 64 encoded PDF signature. I'm sorry, not PDF signature. It's going to be the signed PDF in base 64 format. And so what we're doing here is we're taking that base 64 PDF and we are decoding it just into binary data. And we're going to write that out just straight out to the response, and we're telling it that it is application PDF and that it should be downloaded, and its name is going to be this, lorem ipsum form field.pdf. And so that's going to force the browser, instead of trying to display it, it's going to prompt you, do you want to open it or save it? And so that's kind of what we want to do. Now, this code right here, it is not production ready. So there's some extra care you need to take here. For example, in this process response, I could get back an error message from the DBsign server and there would be no DBS signature. And so I would need to handle that here. And instead of spitting out a PDF, maybe I'm going to spit out JSON again and alert the user that there's a problem, or maybe I'm going to just display an error code here or redirect off to somewhere else with error information. So again, this is just an example. Please, if you use it, especially in your production code, take a little more care with error handling and things like that. So let's see what happens now that we're telling everything on the server side to fill and sign the PDF. So let's start our back end. Whoops. And we should be ready to sign here. So we're going to submit. We're doing John Smith. And again, this is asking us for a certificate just because of the way we've got it set up here. You don't have to use certificates to sign PDFs. And now we've got an option here to save or to open. So let's, we'll just save it for now and we'll go in and look at it. So that would have gone into downloads. And here is my signed form. And we open this up in Adobe and we see that that blank PDF is filled out, John Smith, and we've got our signature right here. And this is my common name. This is that signer name that I showed you in the code. Again, it's just going to be my name. This is the common name out of the certificate that I used. And this date is formatted just the way I told it to format. You see that Adobe is telling us that this document is signed and that the signature is valid. And we can open the signature panel by clicking here, or we can click on the signature itself down here. And we'll go to the signature properties. And we can see that this was signed by our notary certificate on the client side, and this is the signing time, not client side, on the server, sorry, and signing time. And then here we see the reason for signing, approving first and last name. Remember, we provided that string, and notarized on behalf of authenticated user, and then this big string right here. And this was the user ID I passed to it. So that's where those two things come into play. Remember, this test one was what I told it was the signer name, and this was the user ID. And if I would not have said PDF signer name, then this whole string, this starting with CN and all the way through US, would have shown up here. And that may be what you want, but you may not. So you have that flexibility there. And so that's pretty much it. That's how we're going to create how we're going to fill and sign a PDF with DBsign. And one more thing, I told you I'd show you what the request looked like when it got to the server side. So I'm going to stop Tomcat so that all of my logs flush. And let's go to my DBsign logs. Now, if you have not watched the video for enabling server debug logging, you can go watch that and figure out how to create these log files here. So let's just open up this dbsign.txt log in whatever our favorite editor is. And we're going to look at, we just have one request number one, and this is the one that we just made. So the information that came in was all of this, and this should look pretty familiar. We've got all of those things that we specified from the content type, and here's the base 64 encoded PDF. And here are the names of the fields we wanted to fill out, first name and last name, and then all of the other fields that we explained. And then if you look for first name and last name, we see those fields in the post data as well. And then once everything was signed, here's what we got back. We got a success error code and error message. This DBS signature is the base 64 encoded actual signed PDF. And then we could take that and base 64 decode it, and we've got a real PDF. We could spit it out to the browser like we did, or we could stick it off in the database and store it, or store it on the file system, whatever we want to do with it. And so PDF signing is pretty simple. That's pretty much how it's done. It's an HTTP request and giving it just the right information. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit. And please subscribe to the channel so that you'll know when we put more videos out there, and we'll see you later.